My brother stole my savings at 16 and now expects me to lend him $1,200 full story. My brother called me a bad sister for not lending him $1,200, but 4 years ago he stole $800 from a 16-year-old girl who never said a word about it. That girl was me. I'm a 20-year-old woman and my brother is a 24-year-old man. To give you some context, when I was 16, my parents went through a pretty tough financial situation. My brother was already working part-time at the time, but he was always very selfish with his money. He would literally buy unnecessary things while we sometimes lacked basic necessities at home. I didn't realize it back then, but that period of my life would quietly poison the way I see my brother for years to come. It didn't happen all at once. It crept up on me slowly, the way a crack in a wall starts as something so small you almost dismiss it, until one day the whole structure starts to shift. And now here I am, 4 years later, sitting with my phone in my hand, reading yet another message from my mom saying I need to be the bigger person. And honestly, I don't even know how to feel anymore. Angry, guilty, exhausted, all three at once, probably. Let me start at the beginning because I think context matters here, a lot. My brother's name is Trevor. We grew up in a pretty normal household, not wealthy, not destitute, just somewhere comfortably in the middle. My parents, Danielle and Marcus, worked hard for everything we had. My mom picked up extra shifts when she could, and my dad had a steady job in logistics that paid the bills but didn't leave much room for luxuries. They weren't the type to complain about money in front of us, but as I got older, I got better at reading the tension in the house. The quiet arguments behind closed doors, the way my mom would pause at the grocery store before putting something in the cart, the small hesitations that told you more than any conversation ever could. Trevor is 4 years older than me, and growing up, that gap felt enormous. When I was 10, he was 14 and already too cool to be seen with his little sister. When I was 12, he was 16 and had his first part-time job at a sandwich shop, and suddenly he had money of his own and nobody to answer to. I remember being impressed by that. I looked up to him a little even then. He seemed so capable, so ahead of the curve. But I also started noticing things. The way he'd come home with a new pair of sneakers during a week when my mom had been unusually stressed about bills. The way he'd eat out with his friends instead of contributing to dinner on nights when the fridge was looking sparse. He was never mean about it, that's the thing. He wasn't cruel or openly dismissive. He just operated like the family's financial situation was someone else's problem. Like his paycheck existed in a completely separate universe from the one the rest of us lived in. My parents never pushed him hard about it. I think they were proud that he was working at all and they didn't want to discourage that, so they let it slide. Again and again, they let it slide. By the time I was 16, the situation at home had gotten genuinely difficult. I don't know all the details even now, my parents were private about finances, but I know my dad had been dealing with some complications at work that affected his hours and there were some unexpected medical expenses that hit the family hard. It was one of those stretches where everything seems to go wrong at the same time. The kind that tests what a family is actually made of. I had been saving money for a few years by that point, carefully, methodically, the way I did most things. Birthday money that relatives gave me, small amounts from babysitting the neighbor's kids, $20 here and there from helping an elderly woman down the street with her groceries and yard work. I wasn't trying to build a fortune, I was just the kind of person who got quiet satisfaction from watching a number go up in my savings account. I had about $800 by the time I was 16, which felt like an enormous sum to me at the time. It represented years of small efforts. When my mom sat me down one evening and gently asked if I could help out for a little while just until things stabilized, I said yes without thinking twice. I want to be clear about that. I didn't hesitate, I didn't ask what it was for or attach any conditions. She was my mom, we were struggling, and I had something I could contribute. It felt like the obvious thing to do. What happened next is the part that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. Trevor was there when my mom and I had that conversation, or he found out about it shortly after, I was never entirely sure which. Either way, he inserted himself into the situation almost immediately. He told my parents that he would manage the money, that he had more experience with finances than I did, that it made more sense for him to handle it since he was older. My parents thought that sounded reasonable. I think they were relieved to have someone step up and take the organizational burden off their plates. I handed the money over. Over the next few weeks, I watched things unfold from a distance that felt both close and impossibly far. The household needs that my mom had mentioned, groceries, a utility bill, some basic supplies, got handled slowly and incompletely, but Trevor's lifestyle didn't seem to change at all. New things kept appearing, a gaming headset I hadn't seen before, meals he was suddenly treating his friends to. A jacket that I was pretty sure I recognized from a store we'd walked past together once, one he'd pointed at and said he wanted. I didn't say anything at first. I was 16 and I didn't want to cause drama. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that maybe Trevor had his own money flowing in from his job and that was what he was spending. But the more I watched, the less I believed that. And the more I thought about my $800 sitting somewhere undefined, the worse I felt. I finally asked him as casually as I could manage how the money was being used. He was vague. He said he'd taken care of some things, that there were still some bills to sort out, that he had it under control. I pushed a little harder and he got defensive. Told me to relax, that I was being paranoid, that it wasn't my business anymore since he was the one managing it. I remember the specific sting of that phrase, "It's not your business anymore," because it was my money. It very much was my business. He never fully admitted to spending any of it on himself, but he also never provided any accounting of where it went, and the household needs that had been the original reason for the loan were only partially addressed. My parents moved on from that period without ever drilling down into the specifics, and I think on some level they either didn't want to know or convince themselves that Trevor had done his best. I was left with nothing. No money, no real explanation, and a sick feeling in my chest that I didn't have the vocabulary for at 16 but can name clearly now: betrayal. I didn't make a big scene, I didn't accuse Trevor directly or go to my parents and demand answers. I was young, I was conflict averse, and some part of me was afraid of what would happen to the family dynamic if I pulled on that thread too hard, so I let it go, or at least I told myself I was letting it go. What I actually did was quietly close a door inside myself. I stopped trusting Trevor with anything that mattered to me, not money, not personal information, not my plans or my vulnerabilities. I stayed cordial. We still had dinner together, still showed up at the same holidays, still exchanged the occasional text. From the outside, I'm sure we looked like a perfectly ordinary sibling pair. But I had made a private decision that I would never put myself in a position to be taken advantage of by him again. The years passed. I graduated high school, got into a program I was proud of, started working part-time at a job that aligned with my studies. I got genuinely good at managing money, partly because I'd always had that instinct, and partly because losing that $800 had made me more careful, more intentional. I tracked my spending. I built an emergency fund. I didn't make flashy purchases. By the time I was 20, I had saved up a decent amount of money for someone in my position. Not rich, not even close, but financially stable in a way that made me feel genuinely secure. Trevor, from what I could observe, had not gone through the same evolution. He'd moved out of our parents' place a couple of years after I did, well, after I left for school anyway, and got an apartment with a friend. He was working as far as I knew, though never at any job that seemed to stick for long. He had a car that was nicer than he probably needed. He talked about plans a lot, business ideas, investment opportunities, things that were always just around the corner. I'd learned to listen to those conversations with polite neutrality rather than genuine interest, because I'd seen enough of them evaporate into nothing. I wasn't rooting against him, I want to be clear about that. I genuinely didn't carry active resentment toward Trevor in my day-to-day life. I had moved on, built my own thing, and mostly didn't think about the $800, but I hadn't forgotten. There's a difference between letting go of bitterness and erasing your memory, and I think people sometimes confuse the two. So when Trevor called me 3 weeks ago, I could tell immediately from his voice that something was wrong. He had that specific tension in his tone, the kind that sits underneath forced casualness, like a man trying to walk normally with a sprained ankle. We exchanged maybe 30 seconds of small talk before he got to it. He needed $1,200. There was a debt he had to cover, and he needed it within a few weeks, and he'd pay me back in a few months, he promised. I felt the old door in my chest click shut automatically, the same one I'd closed 4 years ago. I didn't hang up, I didn't say no immediately. I asked him calmly, I thought what the debt was for. He said it was complicated. I asked again more directly, was this a situation caused by overspending or by something genuinely outside his control? Because those were two different things to me, and I thought the distinction mattered if he was asking me to trust him with my money. He didn't answer the question. He said something vague about how things had gotten tight lately and that it was hard to explain, and then he pivoted to talking about how he'd definitely be able to pay me back, how he just needed this one bridge to get to the other side. I told him I wasn't comfortable lending him money given what had happened when we were younger. The silence that followed was about 3 seconds long, then the temperature of the conversation changed entirely. He told me I was being resentful, that I was holding onto something from years ago like it was some kind of weapon, that I'd clearly never gotten over it and that was my problem, not his. He said, and this is the part that really sat with me, that a good sister would help her brother when he was genuinely struggling, and that by refusing, I was showing him exactly how little family meant to me. I stayed quiet through most of it, not because I had nothing to say, but because I've learned that arguing with someone who is defending themselves with emotion rather than logic rarely goes anywhere productive. I told him again that I was sorry he was in a difficult position, but that I didn't feel comfortable given our history. He accused me of punishing him for something he didn't even fully remember. I pointed out calmly that his not remembering it didn't mean it hadn't happened. He hung up. 20 minutes later, my mom called. Danielle has a specific way of handling conflict that I've known my whole life. She presents herself as a neutral mediator while very clearly advocating for one side. She started the conversation by asking how I was doing, which under the circumstances felt like someone offering you a glass of water while the house is on fire. Then she gently, carefully walked me through her perspective on the situation. Trevor was struggling. She could see it even if he wouldn't say it. He needed help and I was the one person in the family who could provide it. Yes, there had been some issues in the past, but that was 4 years ago and people change. She'd seen Trevor mature. She believed this time was different. I asked her what specifically had changed about him. She talked about how he'd held his current job for 8 months, which was true and which I acknowledged. I asked if he'd ever acknowledged what happened with my money or apologized for it. She got quiet. Then she said that dwelling on old grievances wasn't healthy and that family didn't keep score. I remember thinking, family didn't keep score is a very convenient philosophy when you're not the one who lost $800. I told her what I told Trevor, that I wasn't saying no permanently, that I wasn't trying to punish anyone, but that I needed some basic transparency about the situation before I put my savings on the line. I said I'd want to know what the debt was from, and I'd want some kind of written agreement about repayment. That felt like the bare minimum for a $1,200 loan to someone who had not historically demonstrated great financial responsibility. My mom said that asking Trevor to sign something would be insulting, that it would signal I didn't trust him. I said fairly gently I thought that I didn't trust him with money, specifically with money, and that this wasn't a personal attack, it was just an accurate statement based on lived experience. She sighed the way she does when she thinks I'm being difficult and moved on to appealing to family loyalty. The conversation ended cordially but didn't resolve anything. Over the next several days, I kept turning the situation over in my mind, the way you do when you genuinely aren't sure if you're being reasonable or defensive. I considered both possibilities seriously. Was I holding on to something that no longer defined who Trevor was? Was I letting a 4-year-old wound dictate a decision that had real consequences for someone I grew up with? I didn't want to be the kind of person who was incapable of extending grace. I also didn't want to be the kind of person who learned nothing from being burned. I talked to my friend Paige, who has known me since high school and therefore knew about the original situation with my savings. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said something that I keep coming back to. She said, "He didn't even tell you what the money is for. That's not someone asking for help. That's someone expecting you to write a check on faith." She wasn't wrong. And that's the thing that I keep circling back to. It's not just the history, though the history matters. It's not just that he spent my money years ago, though he did. It's that even now, even in this moment where he's asking me to trust him with my savings, he won't give me the most basic piece of information. What happened? Why does he need $1,200? What is this debt? Who does he owe it to? How did it accumulate? If a friend came to me in a genuine emergency and asked for money, they wouldn't refuse to tell me what the emergency was. That's not how emergencies work. The fact that Trevor dodged the question not once but repeatedly tells me something. It tells me that either he's embarrassed because it was caused by exactly the kind of poor decision-making I was asking about, or there's something about the situation that he knows I won't find sympathetic. Neither of those possibilities makes me feel more confident about handing over my savings. My dad weighed in eventually too, though more quietly than my mom. He texted me saying he understood my hesitation but hoped I'd find a way to help. That was it. Short and measured, the way Marcus usually is. I appreciated that he didn't lecture me, but the quiet expectation in that text still landed. I haven't responded to Trevor directly since our phone call. I've been thinking about whether I want to try once more, offer again to help if he gives me basic transparency, or whether even that conversation is worth having. Part of me already knows how it would go. He'd accuse me of making him jump through hoops to prove himself, I'd feel guilty, and we'd end up right back where we are now. The thing about family and money is that everyone has an opinion until it's their money. The people telling me I should help aren't the ones who saved their birthday cash and odd job earnings for years, only to watch it disappear into someone else's Amazon cart. The people invoking family loyalty aren't the ones being asked to extend $1,200 to someone who won't explain why they need it. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what family actually means in situations like this. I think for a lot of people, family means obligation. You show up, you give what you have, you don't ask too many questions because the relationship should transcend all of that. And I understand that impulse. I really do. There's something appealing about the idea of a loyalty that operates outside of normal logic. But I also think that framework gets weaponized. I think where family sometimes gets used to pressure people into things they have every rational reason not to do, and then if they decline, suddenly they're the one who doesn't understand what family means. It puts the entire moral weight on the person who's being asked to give something up and zero moral weight on the person asking. Trevor called me resentful, maybe, but I think there's a version of what I'm doing that isn't resentment, it's memory. It's pattern recognition. It's the scar tissue that forms after you've been hurt in a specific way and made you pay attention the next time a situation rhymes with the one that hurt you. He also said it was years ago and I should be over it. But years ago doesn't mean it didn't happen, it just means time has passed. Time doesn't automatically equal change, and it definitely doesn't equal accountability. Trevor has never once acknowledged what happened with my money, not a hey, I know I didn't handle that well, or a I'm sorry things got murky back then. Nothing, not in 4 years. So when he says I should be over it, what he's really saying is that I should absorb what happened without ever receiving any acknowledgement that it was wrong. And that's a big ask. My edit from the original post stands. This isn't a blanket refusal. I'm not saying I'll never help Trevor with anything for the rest of our lives. I'm saying that if he wants me to lend him $1,200, a significant amount of money for a part-time working student, he needs to give me basic information and basic assurances. That is not an unreasonable bar. That is, in fact, the bare minimum that any financial relationship requires. If you were willing to tell me what the debt was from, show some accountability for how the situation developed, and agree to a simple repayment structure, I would genuinely consider it. I haven't ruled it out. I've ruled out writing a blank check to someone who dodges my questions and then calls me a bad sister for asking them. My mom says he's changed. Maybe he has in some ways. 8 months at one job is real. I don't dismiss that. But financial maturity isn't just about holding a job, it's also about how you handle it when things go sideways. And right now, the way Trevor is handling this particular situation doesn't suggest a man who has deeply reckoned with his past patterns. It suggests a man who is in trouble and reaching for the nearest available resource, which happens to be a sister he knows feels guilty about saying no to family. I think about 16-year-old me sometimes. The kid who handed over her savings without hesitation because someone she trusted asked for help, who didn't attach conditions or ask for receipts because it didn't occur to her that she needed to, who watched the money slowly vanish into someone else's life and never fully got an explanation. I'm not her anymore, and I think that's okay. I think that girl deserved better than what happened, and I think the version of me that exists now is allowed to protect herself with the knowledge she didn't have then. So here I am, still sitting with this, still fielding texts from my mom, still unsure whether the guilt I feel is my conscience telling me something important or just the trained reflex of someone who has been told too many times that putting yourself last is what love looks like. What I know for certain, I'm not the same 16-year-old who handed over her savings without asking a single question. I've earned the right to ask questions, and the person asking me for money has the right to answer them or not. But if it's not, then he also doesn't get to call me a bad sister for protecting what I've worked hard to build. I don't think I'm wrong here, but I also know that being right and being at peace with your family are sometimes two completely different things, and I'm still figuring out how to hold both of those realities in the same hand. So Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to lend money to someone who won't even tell me what it's for, based on a history that still feels very real to me?